Hello everyone, so this is the video tutorial for mini assignment 8, the layout grid challenge. I have attached the example here, which is actually on the assignment itself in web courses. So pretty much what we're going to do is we're going to get to this final product here that has this really kind of interesting design using a texture or an interesting image, a grid that you kind of have found out in nature or created yourself by dropping different items on a desktop or a scanner, printer, anything, and then a quote that means something to you. We're going to put in this image using this grid that you found. So to get started, I did File, New in Photoshop. And I actually have the settings here so you can see them. File New, and I created 1000 pixel by 1000 pixel with a 300 resolution RGB canvas. Pressed Create, and then I loaded in 2 pictures. I have a flower texture and a pencil grid. Well, not all pencils, but this is the random grid I got by dropping these items on my tabletop. So I also have my quote here too, so I can kind of copy and paste and have it all here for reference. So to get started, I'm actually going to hide my flower texture layer because that comes later. The first thing I want to do is identify the grid. Now we did this in class with the grid activity, but we did it based off of a poster that was already designed and identifying that grid. So right now we do kind of have a little bit of creative freedom. As you see here, I have like these horizontal lines that I can play with. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to stick to these main elements here and kind of identify this grid. So to get started, you can do this in many different ways. If you feel comfortable enough, you can actually probably go straight for the text tool and use the move and actually just put your text following these lines. Now, I'm going to identify these grid lines just to kind of show you what exactly that I see and what's my thought process. And to do that, I'm going to use my line tool. Now, if you don't see your line tool, you can click and hold if it's default to rectangle or ellipse. So all you need to do is click and hold and get to your line tool. Up at the top, you want to make sure it is set to shape. Sometimes it's set to path, but you want to make sure it is set to shape. No fill. You can actually click the fill and tell it no. And I actually set mine to a stroke of bright red with a 5 pixel weight. I might actually bump that up a little bit so you guys can see it. Might make it actually 20 pixels. So what I'm going to start to do now is identify the grid using my line tool. So I'm just going to make all of these lines kind of following these pens and pencils on the desk. Kind of like to make note here that this Sharpie kind of landed on top of the pencil. That might be something to keep in mind when you're adding your text if there's any kind of overlapping. Maybe that could be where some colors change. Another thing is here that's worth noting is this Sharpie is bigger. So maybe I might want to actually go for my rectangle tool as well as that line tool. So I have my rectangle here. I'm going to actually take back that stroke weight just a little bit. Come up here to my move tool. Kind of set the angle so it kind of follows this here. To kind of indicate that this could be maybe larger text. So I have all of these shape layers now that are unlabeled. So I can actually probably use these still because I did go in order. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I've got rectangle, which is 6. So I actually might delete shape 6 and just know that rectangle I might just change to 6. So these are all in order now. If I actually group these, so I have the very first one selected, and the very bottom one, I'm going to go right here to this little folder icon at the bottom of my layers panel and create a group. So now it says group 1. I'm going to label it grid lines. So now if I actually hide my text layer here that has my quote and hide my pencil grid image, you'll now see the lines. I can turn on the flower texture and you'll kind of see it overlaid. So now I'm going to add the quote to these lines. I have my quote here, so it's already in text, so I can kind of copy paste. Oops, I moved my grid. Keep in mind, you always got the undo if that happens. If stuff starts moving, and this really kind of goes even into our vectors, you can actually select that group and click this lock right here. That means I can't accidentally grab it and I can't move it. See my message? Okay, awesome. So now I know that won't move. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to go to this text layer. I'm going to kind of get it out of the way. I'm going to move over actually to my text tool. I'm going to copy that first line. So you can kind of go about this a couple different ways. You can do the text on the path. And remember, to do that, you actually have to find which shape, select it so it's highlighted. When you know it's highlighted, when it turns blue. So with the line that I want it to follow and the type tool selected, I can come over here and see it's a square right now, but right if I hover over the line, it gives me that squiggly, which means it's going to type right on the path. And I'm going to actually paste my quote. Now sometimes it'll kind of do these funny things where it starts on a weird spot in the line. But if you come right over here, right below that text tool, you find the direct selection tool. If it's not the white cursor, click and hold, because sometimes it starts with the path selection tool, which is the black cursor. You want the white one. With the white one selected and the text layer selected, if you hover over it, you'll see the little type icon and little arrows next to it. Ooh, we actually have to unlock these layers now so you can work on them. So once you hover, you can actually kind of drag it down that line and get it so it fits right where you would like it to fit. So I actually might make it bigger, but we'll see as we go through on the throughout the quote. So I'm actually going to move the quote. It looks like what our issue was that happened here is the quote started within the group after I locked the group. So I'm actually just going to drag it right out of the group. So now I've got my first line of text. Another way that you can do this, like I'm going to mention before, I'm going to go back to my text tool. I'm going to go to my original quote layer, and I'm going to select that second line, copy. Okay, looks good. Make a new text layer. I'm going to go all the way back up to the top, select that first layer. So when I create that next layer, it goes right on top of that last selection. I'm going to paste. Looks good. So now I've got this new line of text. I can go to my move tool. If you kind of hover near the corner, you'll see where it kind of gives you that little curvy arrows, curvy line. And you can actually change the angle. I'm going to move this over to this line. I'm just going to try to follow that baseline. So it looks like this text might be a little bit longer than that pin was, and that's okay. You get a little bit of creative freedom here. So I'll leave that one right there. And then I'm just going to kind of go on throughout the rest of the quote. Now, you can do this either way that you would like to try it. If you want to do the text on the line, that's fine. If you just want to input the text using just this regular text tool, the horizontal type tool, you can do that as well, like I just demonstrated. That's completely up to you. If you have a lot of curves, though, if you went for the circle tool, you might want to use that text on a path so that you get that correct curvature. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to close up my grid lines, and because I have such it's just a lot of angled lines and no curvatures or anything, I'm actually going to go straight for just kind of copying and pasting out these different lines and then using my move tool to get stuff rotated. So I'm going to do this right now. Can I go back up to the top, try to make sure I manage my layers and I keep track of where everything is. So now I need to turn and angle this a little bit. I think I'm going to center that one on that line. Actually, I'll move it a little bit closer. So going down to the next line. You can also change font colors and all kinds of stuff if stuff starts kind of wanting to overlap. This is completely up to you. So can I have that one? That one's almost perfectly flat, but I'm gonna actually level that one out. Might make it bigger. Again, you have a lot of creative freedom here. Just using this grid and trying to make really kind of interesting designs. So now I'm going for the next line of text. I'm actually going to hide this bottom one, and it looks like I put this one right on top of that, so I'm just going to move it all the way back up to the top. Create a new layer, paste. Looks good. Go back over to my move tool. Hover near the corner and rotate. And then right here is that big one, and I know that it's I want to get better. Again, is that last line. So I'm actually going to duplicate this layer. So to do that, I can actually hold Option or Alt and click and drag that layer up, and it duplicates it for me. So that's just a quick little shortcut. So here I'm going to, rotate so it fits in that box where that large highlighter was. And I actually think, just artistically, I might want to actually make these two texts that I want to get better, both of them very large, a different color. So now I have all of these text layers in a group called quote. So what I actually want to do, I think that I probably want to start maybe experimenting with different colors here. So to do that, I think I really want to start editing with the I want to get better layer. So I'm actually going to select both of those by holding Command or Control. With the text tool selected, I come up to the top, and I'm going to think I might make these, let's see, we can maybe make it a green, and then selecting all of the other layers. I can go back up to the top, make sure they're all selected. I'll probably try to find something that's not like a Christmas color scheme, but that kind of goes well with that image. Maybe change these from green. So I think what I might actually do is come back into this adjustment layer and try to maybe edit this picture a little bit so that my text stands out a little bit more. Moving some sliders around. So if this is your final product, right, you've got your texture. I'm actually going to group these two together. I'm going to call it texture. So you've got your texture. Hide the quote. You've got your pencil grid that you identified using grid lines. And then using that grid, you put a quote. And then you put everything together and created a composition. So now I want to see the breakdown of how you got to this point. To do that, you go up to File, New. In most Photoshops, unless you have an older version, if you go to Print, already have a tabloid preset. So if you go to the preset, change it, make sure you don't have it in portrait, you have it in landscape, and then just press create. Now you can do a couple different things here. You can actually save each of these thumbnails that are required one by one, which could be probably the easiest. Or what you can do screenshots, or you can actually just drag the layers between different files, but probably the safest way to go, just so that you have these compositions independently saved, is I just go File, Save As the desktop. I will save it as a JPEG and put Final Comp, I'm going to call it Final Comp 8, save, okay. So I do want to just see the texture, so I'm going to File, Save As, Texture, -8, save it as a JPEG, save, okay, looks good. Then I do want to see your grid, the image that you used for your reference, so I'm going to go File, Save As, Grid 8. And then I do want to see your quote without anything. If you want to include your grid lines because you did create grid lines, that's fine as well. So I'm going to save mine here. File, Save As, Quote 8. And it looks like I probably didn't save Grid 8 as a JPEG, so I'll need to probably go back and do that. Good. Hide those, show pencil grid. File, Save As Grid, JPEG, save. Okay. So once you have everything saved as each individual little thumbnail, you can come up to the top of your Photoshop and you can go File, Place Embedded. You can find all your little parts. So I found my grid, my final composition. Gotta go one by one. So I'm gonna go Final Composition here. File, oops, gotta say yes, that's okay. File, Place Embedded. I'm gonna find the grid, place, looks good. File, Place Embedded. Quote, looks good. Keep in mind you also can drag in your images as well. Just due to the screen recording software, I'm trying to make sure that I don't get things out of the selection area for the screen recording. So now I have all of these files, right? So remember the image here, the example. This is the way that it needs to be structured, right? So all the little thumbnails here kind of building up to this final composition. So I've got my texture. I'm going to select my move tool, move it up here to the top right. Got my quote, I'm going to move it down here to the bottom. Then I've got my grid. And kind of fit right in there with everybody else. Get everything all nice and spaced out. And then I've got my final composition. I'm going to move it over here to this corner and I'm going to enlarge it so I can appreciate it. So from here, you'd File, Save As. You can say Mini 8 Madeline Davis. Save it as a JPEG. Looks good. And that is what you would submit to me. That is my complete walkthrough on how to do this grid challenge. If you guys need any help, don't forget you can always Skype me and I will try to help you troubleshoot it as best as possible. Good luck, and I will see you guys this week.